Hello, my name is Dave Gunter, and welcome to our MEXA's webinar on effective strategies for integrating training into your cybersecurity program. I'm an OT cybersecurity director at our MEXA, and I'm joined with my colleague, John Cusimano. Let me do a quick introduction to myself. If we can go to that next slide. Thank you. 30 years, ICS and SCADA, end user perspective, global leadership with an end user, cybersecurity consultant for many years, 62443, the suite of standards that we have there. And today we're going to concentrate on, like we said, effective training, what it really means. And from an end user perspective, I'm going to be giving you some insights on that. John.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. John Cusimano here, Chief Strategy Officer and VP of our Strategy Services. My background is electrical engineering, and I've really spent my entire career in control and safety systems and industrial automation, with the last 15, 16 years, actually at this point, pretty much dedicated to the field of ICS OT cybersecurity. Prior to that, control safety background in industrial automation. So I've spent, in those 16 years, I've spent a lot of time working with standards bodies and training organizations and pioneering some different methodologies around OT cyber risk assessment and management, and very involved in the 6443 series of standards. My background from a work perspective, I was an end user for early in my career. Working for Eastman Chemical, I worked for automation vendors, and then for the last, again, 16 or so years, I've been leading OT cybersecurity services practices, and that takes me to my role here today at our MEXA. So a little bit about our MEXA, if you are a first-time attendee of one of our webinars. Our MEXA is a company that was founded about 4 years ago, but brings together a team that has decades of experience, industrial cybersecurity experience, as people that have worked as both end users as well as supporting clients, predominantly in critical infrastructure sectors such as oil, gas, chemicals, utilities, and so on. So yeah, so we're about 4 years old, headquartered in Houston, but we have over 30 OT cybersecurity experts, engineers, consultants, again, that have come from various walks of life and various experiences to join this team of industry recognized leaders. We offer a full spectrum of OT cybersecurity services, from governance and program development, what we call strategies or risk management, governance and compliance training. We have engineering services around network design and remediation and technology integration, as well as things like OT DMZ implementation. And then we have an operations team that supports our clients on a run and maintain basis with embedded project engineers and lifecycle maintenance services. And we have also offer a co-managed service called IRIS. That's a little bit about our MEXA and our viewpoint. So you saw one of our offerings is training, and so this webinar today is all about how companies, particularly end user organizations, can best integrate training into their OT cybersecurity program. Some best practices around that. I guess if you look at almost any OT cybersecurity standard, from NIST to 64, actually cybersecurity standard for that matter. So NIST, 6443, API for the petroleum sector, NERC-CIP for utilities, they all talk about the importance of training. And training, both awareness training, general awareness training, as well as fundamentals training and advanced training. So we're going to talk today about training, and we're going to talk about training basics and the background. We're going to talk about training different categories or types of training that are available, the importance of role-based training and assigning people to training based on their roles and the needs of their roles. We're going to talk about different training delivery mechanisms. What are the different ways you can deliver training to your personnel, and some of the more effective ways of doing that. We will get a little bit commercial towards the end. We would like to talk to you about our MEXA's offerings for training. specifically, but everything we're talking about prior to that is just general good best practices. And then we'll summarize and do a Q&A. All right, so I think Dave, turn it over to you to talk about just why build OT
Excellent.
cybersecurity training program.
Thanks, John. So let's talk a little bit about some of the basics. Let's talk about why even build an OT cybersecurity training program. There's strategic drivers and there's organizational benefits. Some of the strategic drivers we're going to discuss are to protect the critical infrastructure. We all know we have to do this. We know that there's OT systems that are essential for operations. Training helps prevent any disruption, safety incidents, and costly downtime. You have to address the unique environment of OT systems. There's a lot of risk in OT. There's legacy systems. There's vendor-specific vulnerabilities. They require a lot of training, tailored training, and close the skills gap. Again, when you look at the skills gap, it's not necessarily skills. It's skills. It's awareness. It's a host of things. But a lot of employees understand the IT aspects of training, but OT is different, and you need to build a culture of understanding that. So OT is similar to IT, but it's not the same. And support the governance and compliance. If you write standards within the OT system for your internal governance for how you navigate these complex topics, you really want to leverage that. And that's a strategic driver. You don't want to write policies, standards, procedures, and job aids to become shelfware. You want to leverage the words you write. When it comes to organizational benefits, you got to foster a security first culture, very similar to safety first. They should parallel each other. You want to reinforce your organizational policies and improve the incident readiness. Those are kind of fundamentals to what your organization will benefit from this. When we look at the next slide, we're talking about building an effective training program. It has 4 rectangles here: it's scope, training categories, role assignments, and delivery formats. The scope we talked a little bit about. We'll dive into that in the next slide, but you have to consider the locations, the relevant regulations, who needs the training, and what's the commitment time per person or per role that you can actually get away with or is required, for that particular sector or module. When we talk about training categories, there's general awareness, there's best practice and industry standards, specific training like the ISA training. There's essential OT training, which is essentially looking at all of your OT policies, standards, procedures, and baking that in so you leverage the words you write in your training material. And advanced training, technical, it's a host of things, but it basically is the training for, let's say, a firewall, a specific manufacturer firewall, or a master class in a methodology. Role assignments. We need to talk a little bit about role assignments to try and structure for a learning journey. You really need to bring people through the general awareness, move them through the best practices, push through that essential OT training for the correct roles, and then move to the advanced training for specific roles that have specific duties. And define who gets what training. That's really what you need to do. And the delivery format. You have to define the delivery format and the refresh cycle. You can do traditional classroom type training, you can do virtual instructor led, or you can do LMS training modules, learning management system training modules that set a format and a style for the training. Those are kind of the 4 buckets that really builds in a good scope for a training program.
Okay. So scope, as Dave said, one of the first things you need to define when you're defining a training program for your organization is what's in scope. Is this a global program? Is it regional? Is it plant specific? And then how will that integrate into people's daily workflows? Are you going to do the training maybe periodically at safety meetings, at onboarding, through an LMS platform, all of the above? And also, if you are a global multinational company, then of course you're going to have multiple languages and cultural issues. So that's part of the scope that you need to consider. And then what should the training cover? And we're going to get a little bit more into this, but it's our belief and a general belief from the standards is that you need to generally start with general awareness training, just make sure people understand why is OT cybersecurity important, some of the fundamental concepts and best behaviors, and then move into standards-based training. What do the standards say? What standards are applicable? So people understand, and regulations. We should also include regulations that could be applicable there as well. Then, as Dave was saying, it's really important to understand so the standards may say one thing, but your company standards and policies and procedures may differ. They maybe you might be more restrictive. You may be less restrictive. It's so this is about, so you not only want to train people on what do the standards say, but you want to train your employees on what are our policies, what are our standards, what are our procedures, and how do they relate back to the standards? Here's how we meet the intent of these standards. Here's where we go above and beyond, and here's some sections where maybe we've decided for risk-based reasons or other reasons that we are not going to implement everything that the standards say, the industry standards. Then advanced topics. Training is like we were saying, different people need different levels of training. So people who are practitioners who are actually implementing and maintaining need a deeper dive, more in-depth training. Many times the best place to get that is actually from the vendors. If you're using a particular secure remote access solution, if you're using a particular patch management solution or a particular access control solution, then maybe the training is oftentimes best taken from the supplier for that advanced training. And then procedures, daily tasks, incident response, change management.
Yeah, that's great points. And if we go to the next slide, Jonathan, just to build on what John says, you really need to look at your regulatory environment and what standards your company prescribes to, because they're key. We're always under the impression that if someone asks you to comply with a standard, it's a difficult thing to say I comply holistically. You want to say, let me show you how we meet the intent. And that's where your company governance comes in. And that's what John was speaking to. So depending on your regulatory environment, what standards and frameworks, we hear a lot of folks say, I'm in this shop or I'm at this shop or that shop. All those things are valid, but we truly need to have a good understanding of the regulatory environment, what your standards and reference standards are and frameworks, and the guidance you have in your particular country. There's different guidance for different countries. That's the other thing. So when you define what good training looks like, you have to kind of address all these things. Let's go to the next slide.
Build on your point there, because you made a good point. Like what in that middle column that talks about standards and frameworks, sometimes companies get this impression that they must select one of these, that they're somehow mutually exclusive, and that's not actually correct. For example, the NIST cybersecurity framework is meant to be an overarching framework, and it's not meant to exclude other standards. It's actually meant to include other standards, and there's direct mapping that NIST provides to a variety of different standards, including ISA 62443. So just to keep that in mind, that when you're building your program, you don't need to select one set of industry standards. You select those that are applicable and marry the information so that you're giving your employees a pretty well-rounded view of what the applicable standards say. And then you're moving into more company specific. Here's how we do it here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And let's go to this next slide here. Examples of OT cybersecurity training topics. 99% of OT cybersecurity training topics are covered here. You talk about access control, asset management, training and screening, backup and recovery, data security, endpoint protection. You may have a revised list that's sort of like this, but this covers the bulk of everything of the topics that are typically covered in cybersecurity training. Patch management, physical security, removable media, secure remote access. There's a host of them here, but the reality is if your training does not cover all of these or they're organized in a manner, you really want to make sure that the training is as comprehensive as you can be, while at the same time breaking these into, and we'll talk about this later, into functional modules, because these are kind of the core core elements of training topics that we typically see either as executed, as taken, and kind of across the board.
Yeah, some companies call these domains, like or training topics, but what the list here is, we internally call it the Armexa Top 20, because what we have done is, in working with our clients and going through all the different standards and regulations that Dave showed on the last slide, we have compiled this list of what we consider to be the top 20, that as you look across all of those, these are kind of the common domains or topics that are seen throughout.
Absolutely. And those training and who you give the training topics to, if we go to the next slide, it all depends on the audience. I mean, you need to define who needs to be trained. Senior and mid-level leadership, they may not need to know about backup and recovery, but they may need to know that backup and recovery needs to be done. There's recovery time point objectives. There's a host of things that they may need to know, but at a very high level, they need to be aware of those things. Employees that work around the systems, but not on them. The horror stories of USB use and USBs found in a parking lot and going in and plugging them in. It's general cyber training, it's general awareness training, but you need everybody to kind of have that understanding and that level of cyber hygiene. Same thing goes for operators and shift supervisors. Signing authorities are a little different. When we talk about signing authorities, we're actually talking about folks that approve management of change. They have direct oversight and signing authority for changes within the OT systems. And we're going to talk about this later. They really should have a good grasp of everything that's out there, because when you're making changes to a system, you really have to understand from a cyber risk standpoint what you're dealing with. And practitioners, those are people performing the engineering and maintenance within the OT systems. They may not need to know all those things. Depending on the scope of the practitioner, whether it's an employee or contractor, you're going to have to kind of select what you want to train them on so it is fit for your operational model. I think that's right. That's the message here, is make sure that your audience has the right training for their role.
Right, because practitioners are oftentimes specialized in a particular aspect.
Right, yep. And the practitioner could be
so they need
to
know that really in depth, but other areas they only need to have general awareness of.
And John, the one thing that always caught me is we used to have analytical folks or electrical folks that did switchgear work, and switchgear's not dumb like it used to be. Okay, so switchgear's got all kinds of connections. They got all kinds of ports. It's pretty smart gear now for many years. And the same thing with the analytical stuff. If you have a bunch of analytical equipment, GCs, things like that, those are practitioners, but they need some basic understanding of some of those topics that we went through, or those domains in the previous slide.
Yep. You're going to give some examples, right?
Yeah, we're going to talk through that later. When we get to what those practitioners are. We'll also take through what the signing authorities need, and also some of the overarching stuff for the engineering team. So now we're down to training categories. John, you're going to take us through this one.
Yeah, I was going to talk through this. So we kind of talk through kind of what's available today, what's available out there today for training. And we'll talk about where we are today and where we would like to be kind of as an industry, but also most likely where you would want to be as an end user. So today, the starting point is most companies offer some kind of general awareness training, and often also will either offer or send their students to other external classes where they can learn about the industry standards. And even get deeper technical training, get certified. So general awareness is that foundation of OT cybersecurity knowledge. Some companies develop their own. Some companies use some materials that are available, such as that from INL. And then there's general best practice and industry standards training, and that's available from a number of different sources today. Commercially, INL, ISA, SANS. Then moving on, and there's intentionally a gap here, that there's quite a bit of advanced training available out in the marketplace. So you can take in-depth technical training regulatory compliance training, methodology training from a variety of different suppliers. But as I mentioned earlier, the technology training is oftentimes best delivered by the technology provider, whether that's your patch management solution or your identity and access control solution. But there's a gap here that we're trying to point out. And that gap, if you do the build, please, is what's missing here is that wedge that talks about company specific governance, company specific policies and practices. And that's what tends to be missing from the generally available commercial training is, again, like, how do we do it here at XYZ company? How does our program take into account all of the industry standards and best practices? And so that's the part that we think is missing. And so on the next slide, we'll talk about filling that void and maybe simplifying the model a little bit too. So you can go ahead and just kind of build that out. But so again, of course, general awareness training, that's foundational. That's something that's needed generally across the board, and you want it to go to a pretty wide audience. We're kind of redefining that central part and calling it essential OT training. It's a combination of, yes, role-based and industry best practices training, but aligned with company-specific domain governance. So rather than have your employees take separate training, here's training on the standards, here's training on here's training on industry standards and best practices, here's training on company best practices and standards. We think the best way to present that to employees is to cover both at the same time. That the essential OT training covers industry best practices and standards as well as company specific. And then advanced training, again, it is what it is. It is advanced, in-depth training on specific technologies and more advanced training for your advanced practitioners. So this is our viewpoint of what the training, kind of what training offerings should look like.
Excellent. And let's go to the audience slide, role assignments. First slide we have here, to John's point, is we talk about general awareness training. We talk about essential OT training and advanced training. The general awareness training, you can see that, senior and mid-level managers, employees that work around the systems, like we talked about previously, operators, everybody should have a foundation of knowledge of general cyber hygiene within OT systems. That's what this general awareness training is kind of targeted for. And then
everybody,
everybody,
right?
Yeah, essentially everybody. If you're within the fence line and you're operating around that, you really should have this general awareness training. When we talk about
just like we all take, in most companies, everyone has to take IT security general awareness training.
Basics.
For anybody working in and around OT systems, they should take OT general awareness training.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And then if we look at the essential OT training, we talk about signing authorities. We talked a little bit about that, and those are the folks that really have to sign off on changes. The engineering manager, maintenance manager that signs off on that, and practitioners. There's certain essential OT training that they need out of those topics that we discussed previously. And then there's also practitioners that specialize in things. So not everybody needs configuration for Cisco switches. Not everybody needs firewall configurations or a master class in risk assessment. Those are role specific for the practitioners. That is their specific role. So when we look at that, we really got to take a look at the role they have and look at the topics and kind of develop the matrix of who gets what training. And if we go to the next slide, just to refresh, these are the training we talked about. We talked about all these essential training topics, asset management. We talked about access control, backup and recovery, all of these things. And does everybody need that? The answer to that is no, but is it role specific? Absolutely. So let's jump to our first example, which is a practitioner. This is a DCS and PLC engineer. You can see the gray boxes are grayed out for particular reasons. They might need to understand access control. They may need backup and recovery. They may need incident response, change management, patch management. They may need removable media, secure remote access, system hardening, and vulnerability management. There may be other topics depending on how you divide up your roles for DCS and PLC engineers at the site or at corporate, and they may need other topics, but that's actually defined with your operational model and how they approach their job. So that's typically an example of what we would see from a practitioner for a DCS and a PLC engineer.
It's an example illustration, right?
Yeah.
You may look at that and say,
That's
no, my DCS engineers need to know network segmentation.
Absolutely.
So it's really a company decision, but we're showing examples.
Examples, exactly. And if we go to the next slide, which is electrical and instrumentation or analytical tech, they may need another subset, but it all depends on their job description and how they're going to interface with the system. And that's why you train people on the things they need to know to do their job. And if their job says they need to know, as John said, segmentation, you give them the segmentation training. Or if they need to know backup and recovery, you make sure they have that. But if you build these out in a modular approach and things like that, it makes your life a lot easier. Then you're providing role-based training very specific for that role and that practitioner. The next example that we have is the signing authority. So this is the individual that would actually sign off on changes on the engineering and operations and management side. They really should have a grasp of all these topics, because when you're making a change, you really don't know what it's going to encompass until you start to go through the process of, does this change affect cyber? Or is there a cyber incident? And you would use what we would call a JCA, job cyber assessment. It's very similar to the job safety assessment, where you list all the tasks, what are the risks, and a great example is, okay, you're going to replace a core switch. Okay, you can replace that core switch, but who's going to sign off on it? What's the risk? What do you have? And that management of change artifact that you produce that says, look, I made sure the firmware was updated. I made sure all the vulnerabilities were patched. I have the new switch. I copied the configuration. I stored the configuration. You go through that host of checklists of things that you have on your job cyber assessment, and you make sure that that's all signed off, and your signing authority should have a knowledge, an active knowledge of all those topics. And a great example here is you turn the thing on and everything's fantastic, but it has a web server enabled. And that may not be what you want. That's why the signing authority will say, wait a minute, is the web server disabled on this? Did you make sure of all that? And that's what this helps with. They have a soup to nuts or beginning to end understanding of all these topics and can ask the right questions and the right sign-off so you can mitigate any risk as that goes through. John, did I catch all that? I wanted to make sure that I gave some practical examples there.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. And then the advanced training. The advanced training is technology training. It's control systems, it's firewalls, it's network equipment. The sector-specific training could be TSA and pipeline, MTSA, FDA, AWA, and the methodology training could be risk management, vulnerability management, and there's a host of advanced training topics that you can take your team through that the practitioners may need that particular training. If they're preparing for a TSA audit and or an MTSA, if the Coast Guard shows up, or FDA, you really need to make sure that those folks are trained on that regulatory environment, along with the technical side, along with the methodology that's appropriate for their job. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about training delivery. We're going to talk about types. There's a host of types there's traditional classroom training. That's traditional what we've seen. There's virtual instructor led, and there's LMS training modules. Those are very distinctive, different types of training. The classroom training type is, I don't want to say it's not as popular. I want to say that it has its place. We don't see it as much. We see a lot of virtual instructor-led training and a lot of LMS training modules where you break all those topics down in the modules so that you can fundamentally fit them into a 20-minute snippet. Someone can go through that, take the test, and understand it. And those are usually the ones that are most effective because you can refresh those. You can do career building on those. If someone wants to grow their career in cyber, in OT, they need to understand those things, and that helps with that from a training delivery standpoint.
Yeah, I think there's like you said, there's traditional classroom training is probably less popular today than it was 10 years ago, of course.
Right. Exactly.
But there's still a place for all three of these, and I've seen many companies do a blend of these, where occasionally they will bring people together physically and do a. Usually, it's probably not good. It could vary, I suppose, what it is. But if they have enough people in one place, that they might actually do traditional classroom training. But virtual instructor-led is very popular, of course, because with remote technology and getting people from various locations together, but still doing it all at one time, all together, has some benefit. And then the LMS self-paced, of course, is super convenient. It allows people to do things at their own time, at their own pace, but you can argue it's not as interactive, of course. So they all have their own place, and so we're not endorsing or disparaging any of them. We're just pointing out that this is what you should consider in your program.
Absolutely. We're going to talk a little bit more about training styles. There's like three main styles that we've seen a lot of. There's static graphics with a narration. Those are just static graphics, take you through the graphics and the words on the screen. It's pretty cost effective. It's kind of straightforward with a narration over top of it. It's probably one of the ones that, it's not the most popular one because I don't want to say that it's death by PowerPoint because it's really not, but it basically is you reading through the graphics and having someone narrate it. That's sort of what that training style looks like.
Certainly can be a little dry, right?
It can be a little dry. Thank you. Dynamic graphics and video clips with narration. This is the one that we see a ton of requests for, just because it's dynamic. The graphics change. You have video clips showing. It keeps people engaged. You have a narration that goes along with it. It takes you through the beginning to the end of the topic, and so it definitely is a training scenario that is easily customizable for your organization. There's also the full animated graphics and narration. Those are kind of with the avatar and the bobbing head that kind of goes around and talks through it. You've seen that on a lot of the IT training. That is popular also, but it doesn't. It requires a lot more customization versus the dynamic graphics and video clips. So those are the three styles of training, and we like to say styles because it's really about capturing the audience interest and maintaining their interest, so that it's always changing and it's always a level of dynamic. While it's not so automated, it's like watching a movie. It allows them to engage and kind of think through it. So those are the three training module styles.
Definitely something you want to think about as you're developing your program. What styles do you want to incorporate, as well as how do you want to deliver it? Yep. I think we have an example, right?
Yes, Jonathan, can we roll that example?
This is an example of the dynamic graphics and video clips integrated with video clips, right? Don't know if the audio is coming through for. Is it possible to share the audio?
The audio seems to have stopped. It might be because we're sharing it through Teams.
Okay. Anyway, this probably gives people enough of an idea of what we mean by this style. But, oh, somebody said they can hear it. That's interesting.
Yeah, I can hear it also, John.
Really?
Yeah.
I cannot. we probably don't need to play all 5 minutes of this. We just want to give people an idea of the what that looks like. All right, Dave, I think I'm taking this next section. So we did want to talk about, as our MEXA, we've been involved in training for many, many years. Myself, for at least 16 years, I've been involved in particularly industry standard training and fundamentals training through my work with ISA and agreements with ISA to directly offer ISA training. So so that's one. We offer industry standard. We have an agreement with ISA, and we deliver ISA training, pretty much the full suite of ISA's industrial cybersecurity training. We do also offer custom role-based modular training, similar to what was just shown there. This is customized for our clients, so it's a combination of industry standards and best practices, but coupled with and tailored for a specific company. So incorporating their standards, their policies, their procedures, and so on, in a modular role-based format. And then we also offer some deep dive master classes on topics where we have specific expertise. So we do not necessarily, so as I said earlier, if you want to be trained on how to configure a Cisco switch or a Palo Alto firewall, you probably want to go to those companies for that training. But if you want a deep dive masterclass on something like the cyber HAZOP or the cyber bowtie methodology, that's something we offer. So I think our next slide we have a few slides that go into these in more depth. So for the ISA, we have been an ISA training partner for at least 2 years now, and as our MEXA, and I have been for since about 2012. I've been instructing ISA courses and helped develop many of these courses and the corresponding certificate programs that go with those. So it's a very, very strong suite of training from ISA, everything from IC 32 and 32C, which are more introductory fundamentals, to more in-depth advanced training on assessing systems, designing and implementing OT security, and operations and maintenance. So strong suite of training. We offer that. We are licensed to offer that directly to our clients, and do so often. This is a newer offering for us. This is the custom role-based training. We've actually done this for many years, but we're finding more and more clients want this kind of bespoke, customized training in a modular format, in an LMS format, a format that they can integrate into their LMS system that's SCORM compliant, and covers both the essentials, but also the company specific policies, standards, and procedures and practices. So it's a combination of that of essential training plus company specific training. And this is where you can create these structured journeys. You can assign different modules to different people based on their roles, and they can be available in a few different delivery styles and models. And then master classes. As I said, we have over the years have developed some master classes around some topics where we have specific deep understanding and expertise. So the ones we have available today, we have one for maritime, for facility security and vessel security officers. We have one for cyber HAZOP, an in-depth on that particular methodology of conducting risk assessment. Same thing with OT bowtie. It's specifically around conducting assessments following that particular methodology. And then lastly, TSA pipeline security directive. So this obviously is for the pipeline sector. And we're always developing new master classes here and there, usually based on customer demand. All right, Dave, I think we can just start to wrap things up.
So we're gonna talk about some of the takeaways here. Really when it comes to training, you want to start with general awareness training, as we talked about, and the foundational objectives that align to the company's operational model. And that truly, when you can define that, that's where that's your baseline. You start there. You advance your baseline of knowledge based on the where your starting point was, with role-based company-specific guidance for best practices, standards, and regulatory compliance. Um, you can't really describe that in a more succinct way. You just keep building on a good baseline. You start with that general awareness training, you move to the advanced for the folks that need it. After the advanced, you move to this enhanced role-specific in-depth technical training and master classes. Like John said, if you need Palo Alto, you need Cisco, you need Fortinet, you need, let's say you need clarity training, you need those types of training.
Mm-hmm.
You will take those classes for the folks that their role fits. For the risk assessment, you may take a master class in cyber HAZOP or something like that. But at the end of the day, you start, you move to the advanced, you go to the enhanced, and then you refine. You traditionally have to refine this. Annual updates to continuously improve your training materials, to address technical and external factors and organizational changes. Business changes was another one, John, that, as your business changes, you have mergers
Sure.
and acquisitions, you take on a new product or a new contract series you've never dealt with before. It changes your risk profile, things like that. You may have to train
Even
more
if you
people.
change vendors, that could
Change
be a driver.
vendors.
Right.
Absolutely.
External
And,
factors, new threats, new
Yep.
vulnerabilities. Yeah. There's a lot of things that
And
would cause you to want to update at least annually.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, if you take the time to write your governance correctly, you put the time into your governance, you write your words on how you meet the intent of these standards, you're training, and then you train off that, you're giving folks the tools that you speak of. You're giving them the training and the tools of how you approach it. And that's the point of the start, the advanced, the enhanced, and the refined. That's truly where you will drive value to the organizations and have an effective training program.
Yeah.
Did I say that right, John?
And culture, right? That it drives your culture. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So now we have a kind of a quick wrap up. We're at 45 minutes. Any Q&A, Jonathan?
I haven't seen any come in. Why don't we give people 30 seconds to enter any questions they may have?
Now's a good time to ask questions.
Yeah. And again, this webinar, we will send out the link for you to access this if you registered for it and could not attend. We always do that to our end user community. And if you have additional questions or you're looking for some help in this area and defining what you need, please reach out to us, because again, we have a lot of experience doing this and we kind of know the tricks, the tips and tricks to make this quick and as I don't want to say painless, because it's never painless to develop this, but it's not as overarching and encompassing as you might think. So that's fine. And our next webinar is securing smaller facilities. John, do we want to do kind of a prequel on that? That is, Jonathan, do we have a date for that? I think we do.
I believe we do. It's towards the end of October, the 29th.
Excellent. Yeah, this is going to be a great webinar.
Yeah, so this webinar is, as the name implies, it is really kind of best practices and techniques and tips for smaller companies that operate smaller facilities. We work with clients of all shapes and sizes, from major, super major oil and gas and chemical companies that operate globally and have hundreds, if not several hundreds, of facilities around the world, to much smaller organizations that maybe only have a few facilities or smaller facilities. We have whether that might be water, wastewater, or smaller municipal utilities, or hospitals, universities. We have a long list of examples of smaller facilities that just don't have the resources. That may not have the resources, but obviously still need to address OT cybersecurity. So this webinar is really for them. It's
Right.
not for the big multinationals. It's for smaller facilities that struggle with resources, that want to improve OT cybersecurity, need to, and many times they're even dealing with regulatory requirements.
Absolutely.
But need solutions that are scalable, quick to implement, effective, and that's what this webinar is going to focus on.
Yeah, and I think to put it another way, John, if cybersecurity is 10% of your job, this is the webinar you want to attend because in the multinationals and the large companies, there are dedicated teams to cybersecurity and OT cybersecurity specifically. And in the smaller facilities, it's 10% of this person's job, 10% of this person's job, and 10% of this person's job. And it never adds up to 100%. And usually those are the folks that have exposure, but don't have the staff, or they don't have the quick tips and tricks to kind of get it through. So this is a webinar you're going to want to join.
Yep. Strategies for those types of users. Yep.
Absolutely. All right. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our Securing Smaller Facilities.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you all.